So I'd like to introduce Isabelle now. We're really blessed today having an amazing lineup of speakers. So I'm going to hand over to yet another amazing speaker. So that's all I need to say, I think.
Well, no pressure. Thanks very much, Corey. Thank you very much. I hope you had a lovely lunch. It was absolutely delicious. Thank you for inviting me here today to talk about how to become a better trainer. My name's Isabelle, and I'm one of the clinical leads team at the Resuscitation Council UK, working on training courses and the science that informs guidelines. With an expert team, I co-authored the Basic Life Support Instructors course, which provides a framework for people wishing to teach basic life support in the community. So a little bit about the Resuscitation Council. We write the nationally recognised guidelines for adult, children and infant resuscitation in the UK. And these guidelines also provide the foundation for CPR training for first aid responders around the country. In order to ensure that the guidelines continue to represent the best and most current evidence-based practice, part of our role is to continually review the science of resuscitation, utilising a NICE accredited process, and to update and publish the latest recommendations every 5 years. We're due for another one coming up next year, so we're already quite busy. Obviously, it's important for healthcare professionals because they rely on Resuscitation Council courses in immediate and advanced life support, which are based on the guidelines, to provide the best standard of care for their patients in the clinical environment. But the same guidelines also inform our public training initiatives, as we recognise that if everyone has the skills to save a life, we ultimately reduce mortality rates from sudden cardiac arrest in every environment. So let's look at a couple of statistics to illustrate why we feel so passionately about being a good trainer. According to the Office of National Statistics, ischemic heart disease is still one of the leading causes of death in the UK. Now, there is some good news in that deaths from ischemic heart disease reduced from 13.3% in 2022 to 9.9% last year, but, small steps. We know that the primary cause of 8 out of 10 cardiac arrests are a cardiac problem, and you won't be surprised to hear that most cardiac arrests occur in adults. However, what you might be surprised to know is that at least 1/3 of those people who have had a cardiac arrest were aged between 15 and 64. So it's definitely not just a problem of increasing age. These statistics actually translate into the NHS ambulance service attempting resuscitation in approximately 30,000 people each year, and that's a significant burden on stretched resources. So last year, Resuscitation Council UK published a Vision 2030, which included an aspirational commitment to increasing the availability of CPR awareness and training throughout the UK. We believe that in order to ensure that everyone receives appropriate cardiopulmonary resuscitation treatment in clinical, community and care settings, people should have access to appropriate, high-quality CPR training provided by excellent trainers. And that's where you guys come in. But how does becoming a better trainer linked to outcomes? Well, we know from a number of epidemiological studies that bystander CPR can really improve survival outcomes. So this example is from the Eureka 2 study, which took a snapshot comparing resuscitation outcomes across Europe. And it found, not unsurprisingly, that people who didn't receive bystander CPR only had about a 4.3% survival rate. But that almost doubled if a bystander gave CPR on collapse. Now, this is significant as it suggests that if everyone learnt CPR, they may be better equipped to actually provide it. And it's particularly important when you consider that in the UK, although half of out-of-hospital cardiac arrests are witnessed by a bystander, bystander CPR is only attempted in 7 out of 10 cases. So this graph shows that that the UK's survival to discharge is really probably less than 1 in 10. And you can see us circled here. And what you may say is, well, it looks we're sitting in the middle of the pack, and our outcomes are similar to many other countries in the study. However, what I'd like to draw your attention to is the Netherlands, right up here at this end, have achieved an impressive 18%, which is double that of the UK in survival. Now, I should say that these there are national differences in the way data is collected and reported, so it's difficult to make clear and direct comparisons between countries. But it does suggest that we could make improvements if we actually increase the amount of CPR awareness training. On a more localised level, in the Stavanger region of Norway, they showed an improvement in their survival rate from an already pretty amazing 18% to an absolutely fabulous 25%. Analysis on what changed was actually, they found that bystander CPR rates had actually increased from about 60 to 73%. And at the same time, early defibrillation had also improved. So this actually suggests that by simply training more members of the public to recognise cardiac arrest and give CPR, resulted in significantly better and improved outcomes. So, in order to fulfil our vision, and I think our common goal, we recognise that trainers are a key resource. We wanted to support instructors who are out there, like you guys, providing training to the public to become even better. We hope that in providing existing trainers and those who are interested in becoming trainers with the BLSi course, we can make CPR become a mechanism to reduce social inequalities rather than just another measure of them. We think that the general principles of delivering training, whether it's training an instructor or teaching CPR, are the same. So we've used the key ingredients that make a successful CPR training session as a recipe for the basic life support instructors course. And these, of course, are knowing your subject, because training needs to be based on a strong foundation of evidence, enabling the instructors to answer learners' questions confidently, accurately, and to demystify practice. Knowing your audience allows you to tailor your training to the needs of the learners, ensuring that practical skills are practiced and building learners' confidence at the same time. Good training is making sure that everyone has access to it and can actively engage in the content provided, and giving value to the training by rewarding the learner through assessment skills and certification will actually improve engagement. So, based on the insight from a community of trainers, we hope that what we've created is a resource for both new and experienced instructors to support and enhance their practice. Now, we all know that when we're training and assessing CPR, we're looking for chest compressions to be delivered within certain parameters. Understanding the science that informs these parameters will help us to better press home the importance of achieving them. So let's look at some of that science. This is a study by Idris and colleagues who looked at survival to out-of-hospital discharge for just over 3,000 people in the context of chest compressions. You can see here that the probability of survival identified by the bell curve is significantly reduced if compressions are given at a slower rate than 100 beats per minute or a faster rate than 120 beats per minute. And this study has been replicated in 2015 with similar results. So, the guideline states the optimum rate for chest compressions is 100 to 120 beats per minute. Furthermore, We can explain the science behind compression depth with this study by Steele and colleagues. The graph on the screen shows that the compression depth of less than 4 centimetres or greater than 6 centimetres is inadequate and survival is affected. Now, this is particularly important as other studies have shown that rescuers, particularly those with minimal experience, tend not to push as deep as instructed because possibly they're concerned about causing more harm. So as a good instructor, we need to remind our learners that it's hard to make things worse when you consider that the person who's in cardiac arrest has actually stopped beating and therefore they're clinically dead. Equally, as important for efficacy of chest compressions, we need to think about allowing full recoil off the chest. We need to allow the chest to fully recoil and the heart can therefore refill with blood. Full recoil of the chest maximizes cardiac output and coronary perfusion pressures. So this graph shows that leaning or incomplete recoil when people are doing chest compressions has a negative effect on blood flow to the heart, and therefore the more the rescuer leans on the chest, the lower the blood flow is to the heart and the brain. Another important message for your learners is stressing minimal interruptions in chest compressions. Now, although this study by Berg and colleagues is an old one, it illustrates very clearly that every time you stop chest compressions, the circulation stops. And it takes a little bit of time to build up that pressure again to ensure that you're adequately perfusing the heart and the brain. And it also shows you that with continuous chest compressions, that coronary artery perfusion pressure is actually higher. And finally, probably we need to talk a little bit about rescue breaths. So, following COVID, there's been still a great deal of debate out there in the community about rescue breaths. As you can see from these studies from the Eureka 2 trial, those people who received what we term as full CPR, i.e. including rescue breaths, tripled their chances of survival. This evidence underpins the RC UK Basic Life Support Guidelines that state that if you're trained to do so, after 30 compressions, you should give 2 rescue breaths. Now, to be clear, the guidelines say if you're not trained to give rescue breaths, attempting to do so may cause significant interruptions in chest compressions, which we already know lowers the chances of survival. So giving compression-only CPR is acceptable because doing something is better than doing nothing at all. However, if you, as a team, are teaching basic life support sessions and you're teaching your candidates or learners to give rescue breaths, you'll be contributing to improving survival rates. Now, being armed with a solid foundation of knowledge is the first step to successful training. But it also means that if you want people to be trained successfully in CPR, they need to have effective practical skills and a willingness to act. So this relies on practical skills being practiced. Let me ask you a question. When you're assessing performance, just give me a show of hands, do you use objective methodology? Yeah, great. So there are a smattering of people that do that. This study by Fletcher and colleagues measured the average speed of compressions given by trained healthcare professionals. That's trained healthcare professionals. And you'll notice in the first 3 periods, they're way too fast. However, by period 4, we had introduced a metronome beeping at 110 beats per minute. And you'll notice that all the rest of the series, the individuals were able to deliver chest compressions ideally between 100 and 120 beats per minute. Now, I'm an old girl, and I spend quite a lot of time assessing against the criteria. But it is actually quite difficult to assess just by observation only. So, what do you think about these? What kind of evidence or what kind of feedback would you give about those chest compressions? Yeah. It's a pretty good obvious one, but actually I'd be telling the candidate that they need to lift their hands up a little bit more because they're not allowing ventricle filling. What about this one? Yeah, there's a lot of bouncing on this one as well. So perhaps just lifting the heel of the hand rather than anything else. What about this? Yeah, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. That's about 140 beats per minute. So we all got that one. What about this one? You see, and that's the trick question. I understand why you think that's too slow, but we've timed it and it's 117 beats per minute. So when you're observing these sorts of things, if you're looking at one to another, you might be comparing the two as opposed to looking directly at what you're doing. And I know that using video is a bit unfair because there are all kinds of things like camera angles that you need to factor in as well. But it's just an example that observation sometimes needs some objective methodologies. So using tools like metronomes or mannequins that give you tangible objective feedback on the learner's technique can, with your experience and top tips, really ensure the main objective of your session, which is to ensure that learners can deliver high quality CPR and feel really confident that they're doing a good job when or if they ever have to do this in real life. Now, your role as an instructor is not just to be, well informed about your subject matter. You need to be able to answer your learners' questions accurately and to dispel some of the urban myths that are out there which can arise potentially and affect your management. So let's have a look at a couple. Anybody heard about this? Yeah, I've heard many trainers say this using the rationale that, the casualty might be deaf in one ear. This is absolutely wrong, and it adds another stage to the assessment which may confuse your learners and adds absolutely no value. What about this one? Well, this is also erroneous. This more defensive approach to a casualty, they're not likely to become aggressive. There's no scientific basis for this, and it adds just another unnecessary concept for the learner to remember. So, after the urban myths, we also have a responsibility to answer our learners' questions because that will help with some understanding and the assimilation of the key facts. So I've included a couple of common ones. So, what about the first one? Well, the answer to this is that in adults, the recommended depth of chest compressions is 5 to 6 centimetres. Everyone in the room knows that. Body weight doesn't really affect anatomical depth of the chest or the position of the heart. So, the amount of pressure needed to compress the chest is fairly consistent, irrespective of your particular size or weight. Another common question about the about using automated external defibrillators, because people are worried that we talk about shocking and it's technology and all those kinds of things. You can't stop me now. I'm on a roll. Great. Hang in there. I'll do it really quickly. It's basically that anyone can use an AED and they don't need training. Although if you include it in your training, it gives people more confidence to actually just grab it and do it. Oh, legal problems. Well, just suffice it to say, there has never been a case in the UK where a first aider has been successfully sued. It's a common problem, and people fixate on the fact that when they're trying to do good, they might get sued, but it's not a reality. And finally, do not attempt resuscitation. Does creep its way into your training sessions. And really, what we should be saying to our learners is simply that if you are acting as a concerned citizen, there is no expectation that you will know about sort of advanced life support or advanced decision making, and therefore you should simply do what you've been taught to do, which is to give CPR, and indeed the professionals will make the decision when they arrive after you've rung 999 or 112. It's a little bit more tricky when a bystander will say the victim doesn't want it, but I would just continue to do what you need to do. Just keep it simple, okay? So finally, actually, if we really want to do something about making sure that in the UK everyone has the skills to save a life, we really need to get an inclusive and accessible view to giving CPR. We live in a wonderfully diverse society, and I passionately believe, in fact, that everyone should do CPR. You can imagine that everyone in my house absolutely knows how to do it. Now, I do know that there may be some barriers to some people. For example, they might not physically be able to do it, but I would say that everyone should have the access to CPR awareness training, because with the knowledge of what to do, they can direct others to do it in an emergency situation. So it's valuable for everyone. And I have to say, it's exactly what happened when my daughter was a very young child and she saw somebody collapsed. Okay? So, the consideration for intersectionality is important because inclusivity can't just be tackled in isolation. Being good trainers means that we need to understand that protected characteristics, some of which may not be visible, are part of our community, and we recognise that all of our learners have many attributes that can contribute to who they are and what they can do for the wider community. So, when we're talking about engagement, as instructors, we have an obligation to embrace our community, to recognise culture, religion, ethnicity, language and nationality, and consider how we can make our sessions accessible to all. We can celebrate diversity in a number of different ways. It may be as simple as engaging community leaders who will be able to promote your session and the importance of learning life support skills. For instance, on a national level, we work with the British Islamic Medical Association, BEMA, it's much easier to say, to promote CPR awareness in the Muslim community. We have to remember that some people learn at a different pace and may become confused or suffer from cognitive overload. So our approach to teaching can reduce this by putting in some simple breaks, breaking the skills down into manageable chunks, and repetitive practice with good facilitation. Language is important as well, and situating your learners in their own lived experience can really help to give credibility. And of course, we also have to remember that some learners have neurological differences, and their brains don't work in the same way as ours do. But they're just as important. Teaching inclusively, therefore, requires us to be sensitive of and aware of and sensitive to the needs of each one of our individual learners, and to make adjustments to support their learning. One of my most rewarding sessions is that I teach CPR awareness to the sixth formers at the local special educational needs college. I tell you, my learners are the most amazing, enthusiastic, motivated and engaged kids, people, grown-ups, that I have ever had the pleasure to meet, and I have no doubt that they would be a real asset in an emergency. So together we can achieve much. We can be even better trainers if we have a knowledge of our subject and a knowledge of our audience. We can achieve our goals to ensure high quality basic life support is available to everyone. Thank you so much. Did I make it in the time?
That was crazy. We're going to make time for a couple of questions, because I know that you're going to be going to the break, so we'll make time for a few questions.
Yes.
Yeah, I see a lot about inclusivity, but I've never seen any guidelines on how to make adjustments for CPR for people with physical disabilities. Are there any out there?
So from the science, you'll see that delivering chest compressions has to be generally with your arms. I often get asked, can I just do it with my foot? No, you can't. You can pump up a mattress with it, but you can't do CPR. So making adjustments is quite difficult. But as I said, one of the things is about making sure that people can see and understand the individual steps, and then they can ask others to do that. So if they're knowledgeable, they can engage able-bodied people, because it is extremely difficult for somebody with perhaps a physical disability to be able to do CPR within the parameters that will make it effective.
Yeah.
Is there any data on Pakistan CPR based on things like ethnicity, faith, skin colour? Is there any data out there we can use for that?
Do you know, there is actually, there's some really interesting work around social inequalities, and we need to do a lot more about that. But actually what we do know is that in ethnic minority areas, the likelihood is that the incidence of ischemic heart disease and cardiac conditions is higher, but their access to CPR awareness training and their ability to actually do something is lower. So they become real hotspots, and I don't hold it against me, I come from London, and we have a number of real clear hotspots in our fantastically diverse city, and that's one of the things that we're working with groups like Brentford Football Club, for instance, to actually get that information out there into these areas to raise awareness in the first place.
Is there data available that we can use to show this just now, to show the problem, and then generate response and activism to it?
Oops, no, this one. If you give me, send me an email, I'll see what I can dig up and send it to you.
Yes, you mentioned people being able to pass on their skills to other people if they're physically not capable of doing it. At one time in the past, we used to allow CPR to be done on a table, somebody had a bad back, for instance. And they said, well, in a real emergency I get down, but I don't want to risk my back in the training. Now, I believe that's no longer permitted to pass on.
Not as far as we're concerned. I would always make adjustments for people so that they can practice the skills, because practical skills are really important. Now, I don't want to stand on anybody's toes, and I know that accrediting bodies have a certain set of requirements. But as far as we're concerned, if I would be making those kinds of adjustments so that people actually in real life get a chance to do things practically.
I would like to direct my question later then. Thank you.
Any more questions for Isabelle? Yeah.
How do you describe the depth of chest compression for children?
Okay, so the depth of chest compressions for children is usually quoted at 4 to 5 centimetres, or a third of the depth of the chest. I think the problem is that we used to say a third of the depth of the chest, but who knows what a third is when you're looking at it? You know, it's an emergency. You don't get out, you take measure, and you can't really tell. So 4 to 5 centimetres or a third of the depth of the chest.
For anybody 1 and up? For 1 and up?
Back was first, sorry.
1 and up?
To a 1-year-old, a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old.
So when we talk about children, it's from over 1 to 18. But, you know, again, you're not looking for ID, so if they look like an adult, treat them like an adult. And under 1, that's an infant, so it's 2 fingers and it's a third of the depth of the chest.
Yes.
Sorry.
No, that's great. Last question at the back, thank you.
Yep.
So, perhaps for your next myth busting, but I work with a lot of trainers. So with CPR, we've got an automated external defib, pads on,
Yep.
analysing heart rhythm,
Yep.
small pause,
Yep.
compressions while we're waiting for it to shock, because that seems to now be creeping in. Number of trainers.
Okay, so
You get about 6.
Manufacturers of AEDs will recommend how you do things. In most circumstances, however, what I would suggest is when you turn the defib on, if it tells you to pause chest compressions analysing heart rhythm and it doesn't tell you to recommence chest compressions, then just pause, because the charging time on the defib is actually very fast. It doesn't feel like that when you're doing it with a training AED, because it gives more time for people to work through that cognitive overload and make a decision about whether they're going to press the alarming button. If your manufacturer tells you to go back onto the chest, then do what the machine says. But in normal circumstances, turn the machine on, follow the prompts and press the button if it tells you to do it. That's what I'd be telling anybody, because otherwise we get into all kinds of ifs, buts and maybes. Is that okay with everyone?
Thank you.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you.